The winter of 1887 came early to the Colorado Territory, bringing with it a fury that even the oldest settlers couldn't recall. Snow fell in thick sheets across the San Juan Mountains, blanketing the narrow valleys and burying the trails that connected the scattered mining towns and cattle ranches. The wind howled through the passes like a wounded animal, carrying with it the promise of isolation and hardship that would last until spring's uncertain arrival. Jonah McCready pulled his collar higher against the biting wind as his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Belle, picked her way carefully along the frozen trail. Ice crystals formed on his 3-day beard, and his breath came out in white puffs that disappeared instantly into the gray afternoon. He'd been riding for 2 days straight from the Rocking J Ranch where he'd spent the last 4 months working the fall roundup, and every muscle in his body ached with cold and exhaustion. The familiar weight of his Colt, .45, rested against his hip, a reminder of the life he'd tried to leave behind but could never quite escape. 5 years had passed since that night in Amarillo when he'd been forced to draw on Jake Morrison and his boys. Self-defense, the judge had said. But the law's verdict didn't stop Morrison's kin from swearing vengeance, nor did it wash the blood from Jonah's memory. A man could ride 1,000 miles, work 100 different ranches, but some shadows followed no matter how far you ran. The trail curved sharply around a massive boulder, and Jonah reined Belle to a stop. Below, through the swirling snow, he could make out the dark shapes of what had once been a freight wagon. The vehicle lay on its side, half buried in a drift, its cargo scattered across the white landscape like breadcrumbs for giants. Flour sacks had burst open, their contents mixing with the snow to create ghostly patches. Canned goods lay strewn about, some crushed, others intact but abandoned. Jonah dismounted slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward his revolver. The scene had the look of violence about it, not just an accident caused by weather and treacherous terrain. As he approached, leading Belle by the reins, he noticed the telltale signs. Bullet holes splintered through the wagon's sideboards, dark stains on the snow that the fresh fall hadn't quite covered. Blood, at least a day old, maybe 2. The bodies were gone, which meant someone had either taken them or they'd managed to escape. Jonah knelt beside the overturned wagon, studying the tracks that remained visible. 3 riders had come from the east, their horses' hoofprints deep and purposeful. The wagon driver had tried to run. Jonah could see where the wheels had carved desperate furrows in the snow before the vehicle had overturned. Raiders, most likely, or worse. The organized gangs that had been plaguing the territory since the silver boom brought wealth and desperation in equal measure. Jonah had heard talk at the Rocking J about increased attacks on the supply routes, but seeing it firsthand brought back memories he'd rather forget. He stood, brushing snow from his leather chaps, and scanned the horizon. Whoever had done this was long gone, but the violence lingered in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Belle snorted nervously, sensing her rider's unease. "Easy, girl," Jonah murmured, patting her neck. "We'll be home soon." Home. The word felt strange on his tongue. The cabin he'd built 3 winters ago in a sheltered valley 20 miles north could hardly be called that. It was shelter. Nothing more. 4 walls and a roof where a man could wait out the storms and drink himself into forgetting, at least for a while. But it was his, bought with honest wages and built with his own hands, far from the towns where his name might be known and his past might catch up. He mounted up again, leaving the destroyed wagon to its snowy grave. The light was failing, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gray. He'd need to push hard to reach Copper Creek before full dark. The little mining town wasn't much, a collection of rough buildings clinging to the mountainside like barnacles on a ship's hull. But it was the last stop for supplies before the final climb to his cabin. The storm intensified as he descended into the valley where Copper Creek huddled against the elements. Snow drove horizontally now, stinging any exposed skin like tiny needles. Belle lowered her head and pushed forward, trusting in a rider's guidance and her own mountain-bred stamina. The town materialized out of the white fury like a mirage. Yellow light spilled from windows, creating warm pools in the darkness. Smoke rose from chimneys only to be torn away by the wind. Jonah could hear the tinny sound of a piano fighting against the storm, coming from the Gilded Lady Saloon. He led Belle to Murphy's livery, pounding on the door until the old Irishman opened up, grumbling about the weather and late arrivals. But Murphy's complaints were good-natured, and he took Belle in with practiced care, promising warm mash in a dry stall. "Hell of a storm coming," Murphy said, accepting the coins Jonah pressed into his palm. "Might want to consider staying in town tonight. Sarah's boarding house has rooms." Jonah shook his head. "Just need a few supplies. I'll be moving on." Murphy squinted at him through the lamplight. "You're McCready, aren't you? Got that cabin up Eagle's Nest way?" "That's right. Figured. You always were one for keeping your own company." The old man spat tobacco juice into a bucket. "Well, if you're set on it, you'd best know the general store's closed already. Ben Tucker took sick last week, and his wife's been struggling to keep up. But there's hot food at the Gilded Lady. And word is they've got themselves a new singer. Voice like aged whiskey. They say might be worth warming yourself by the fire for a spell." Jonah had little interest in saloon singers or crowds, but his stomach had been empty since dawn, and the thought of hot food was too tempting to ignore. He thanked Murphy and stepped back into the storm. Following the sound of music and laughter to the saloon, the Gilded Lady was exactly what he'd expected. Rough-hewn timbers, sawdust on the floor, and air thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. Miners just off shift crowded around tables, their faces flushed with drink and the relative warmth. A few cowboys huddled in one corner, probably stuck in town by the same storm that had caught him. Jonah found an empty spot at the bar, keeping his back to the wall, out of long habit. The bartender, a massive man with forearms like ham hocks, slid a whiskey in front of him without being asked. "2 bits, the man growled. "Kitchen's still open if you're hungry." "Beef and beans, if you've got it." The bartender nodded and hollered the order through a door behind the bar. Jonah nursed his whiskey, feeling the warmth spread through his chest, and tried to ignore the curious glances from other patrons. Strangers always drew attention in small towns, especially strangers who wore their guns like they knew how to use them. The piano music stopped abruptly, and a hush fell over the crowd. Jonah looked up to see a woman stepping onto the small stage at the far end of the room. She wore a deep blue dress that had seen better days, but still managed to convey elegance in this rough setting. Her auburn hair was pinned up, revealing a long, pale neck. But it was her eyes that caught him, green as summer grass and holding secrets like a deck of cards held close to the chest. When she opened her mouth to sing, Jonah understood what Murphy had meant. Her voice was indeed like whiskey, smooth and burning at the same time, with a raspy quality that spoke of smoke and sorrow. She sang Barbara Allen, that old ballad of love and loss, and every man in the room seemed to lean forward, caught in her spell. But Jonah heard something else in her voice, something that made him grip his glass tighter. Fear. It was subtle, hidden beneath the professional performance. But it was there. This woman was running from something, just as surely as he'd been running these past 5 years. Their eyes met across the smoky room, and for a moment, her voice faltered. Then she recovered, finishing the song with a flourish that brought rowdy applause from the crowd. But her gaze returned to him, a question in those green depths that he wasn't prepared to answer. His food arrived, and Jonah forced himself to focus on the simple meal, though he could feel her presence like heat from a stove. When she began her next song, "The Water is Wide," he kept his eyes on his plate, but her voice wound around him anyway, speaking of impossible crossings and loves that couldn't be reached. "She's something, ain't she?" The bartender had returned, wiping down the bar with a gray rag. "Showed up 3 weeks ago on the stage from Denver. Goes by Evelyn, no last name, which tells its own story, I reckon." Jonah grunted noncommittally, pushing his empty plate away. "Course, a woman like that don't end up in Copper Creek without reason," the bartender continued, lowering his voice. "Word is someone's been asking after her in the bigger towns. Man needs to be careful about the company he keeps, if you take my meaning. The warning was clear enough. Jonah left money on the bar and stood to leave, but found his path blocked by a swaying miner who'd had too much whiskey and too little sense. "You're new," the miner slurred, jabbing a finger at Jonah's chest. "Don't like new." Jonah sidestepped smoothly, avoiding confrontation with the ease of long practice. "Just passing through, friend." But the miner wasn't satisfied. He grabbed Jonah's shoulder, spinning him around. "I'm talking to you, saddle tramp." The saloon grew quiet. Jonah felt the familiar coldness settle over him, the clarity that came when violence threatened. His hand didn't move toward his gun. He wouldn't need it for this, but his body shifted, weight balanced, ready. "Let it be. Carl." The woman's voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. She'd left the stage and stood nearby, one hand light on the miner's arm. "This gentleman was just leaving. No harm done." Carl looked down at her, confusion replacing belligerence on his weathered face. Sure, Miss Evelyn, if you say so." She guided the miner back to his friends with practiced ease, then turned to Jonah. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the weariness beneath the paint and powder. She was older than she'd appeared on stage, perhaps 30, maybe more, and beautiful in the way of a rose that had weathered storms. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Though I could have handled it?" "I'm sure you could have." Her voice carried a different quality now, lower and more genuine without the performance. "But bloodshed's bad for business. Mr. McCready." She studied him for a moment, those green eyes taking in details he'd rather keep hidden. "The man with the cabin up on Eagle's Nest. I've heard of you. They say you keep to yourself." "They say a lot of things." A smile ghosted across her lips. "That they do. Safe travels. Mr. McCready, this storm's going to be a bad one." He touched the brim of his hat and made for the door, but her voice followed him one last time. "Sometimes being alone isn't the answer. You know, sometimes it's just another kind of running." Jonah didn't reply. He pushed through the doors into the howling night, her words chasing him like the snow that swirled through the empty streets. As he made his way back to the livery to collect Belle, he couldn't shake the image of those knowing green eyes or the sound of that whiskey voice singing about waters too wide to cross. The storm was indeed getting worse. Murphy tried once more to convince him to stay, but Jonah was determined. He needed the solitude of his cabin, the silence that didn't ask questions or demand answers. He saddled Belle despite the old man's protests and headed out into the white fury of the night. But as he climbed the treacherous trail toward Eagle's Nest, fighting through drifts that grew deeper by the hour, he found himself thinking about a woman who sang with fear in her voice and spoke truths to strangers in saloons. Evelyn, no last name, running from something just like him. The wind screamed through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Jonah pulled his coat tighter and urged Belle forward, but for the first time in 5 years, the thought of reaching his empty cabin brought no comfort at all. The gaslight flickered in Evelyn's small room above the gilded lady, casting dancing shadows on walls stained with tobacco smoke and age. She sat before the cracked mirror, slowly removing the pins from her auburn hair, each movement deliberate and weary. 3 weeks in Copper Creek, and already she could feel the walls closing in. It was always the same. Arrive in a new town, sing for her supper, watch for unfamiliar faces that might spell trouble, and plan the next escape. St. Louis seemed like a lifetime ago. Though it had been barely 6 months since she'd fled in the dead of night, the bruises had long since faded, but other marks remained. The way she flinched when men moved too quickly, the careful distance she maintained even in crowded rooms, the derringer hidden in her bustle that she checked obsessively. William Hartley, even thinking his name made her stomach clench. Her husband, former husband, she corrected herself, though the law might see it differently. A successful whiskey merchant with connections throughout Missouri and beyond, respected in society, generous with his donations to the church, No one would have believed what happened behind the closed doors of their Beacon Hill mansion. No one did believe it, which was why she'd had to run. A soft knock at her door made her freeze. "Who is it?" "It's Martha. Dear, brought you some hot tea." Evelyn relaxed slightly, opening the door to let in the saloon owner's wife. Martha Brennan was one of the few genuinely kind souls she'd encountered in her flight westward. A motherly woman who asked no questions about why a trained singer would choose to perform in a mountain mining town. "You were wonderful tonight," Martha said, setting the tea tray on the small table. "Though you seemed distracted during that last set." Evelyn poured herself a cup, grateful for the warmth. "The storm has me on edge, I suppose." Martha's knowing look said she wasn't fooled. "That Macready fellow seemed to catch your attention. Can't say I blame you. He's a handsome devil, even with all that brooding he does. I was simply preventing a fight." "Of course you were." Martha patted her hand. "Still, you could do worse. Jonah Macready's got a reputation for being honest, even if he is a loner. Bought his land fair and square, pays his debts, doesn't bother anyone. There are stories about some trouble in Texas. But out here, who doesn't have a past? Who indeed?" Evelyn thought. She sipped her tea and changed the subject. "Tell me about the other singers who've worked here. I'm curious about the circuit." Martha launched into tales of various performers who'd graced the Gilded Lady's small stage. But Evelyn only half listened. Her mind kept returning to the man in the saloon, the way he'd held himself, ready for violence but not eager for it, the sadness in his dark eyes that matched her own. When their gazes had met, she'd felt a jolt of recognition, not of the face, but of the soul. Here was someone else who knew what it was to carry ghosts. After Martha left, Evelyn tried to sleep, but the wind's howling made rest impossible. She rose and went to the window, peering out at the storm-swept street below. Snow fell so thickly she could barely see the buildings across the way. Anyone with sense was indoors, warm and safe. Yet she couldn't shake the memory of Macready heading out into that maelstrom, choosing the fury of nature over the company of people. She understood that impulse all too well. Sometimes the cold seemed friendlier than human warmth, because cold couldn't betray you. The next morning brought no relief from the storm. If anything, it had intensified overnight, burying Copper Creek under a white shroud. Evelyn made her way carefully down to the saloon's main room, where a handful of trapped travelers and townspeople had gathered around the stove. Going to be a 3-day blow, at least. Tom Brennan, Martha's husband and the Gilded Lady's owner, announced to anyone listening. "Charlie just tried to make it to the livery and nearly got lost between here and there. We're well and truly snowed in." The atmosphere was tense with forced conviviality. Being trapped with strangers brought out the worst in some people, and Evelyn could already see the signs. The way the miners eyed the cowboys suspiciously, how the traveling merchant clutched his sample case like it contained gold. She helped Martha serve breakfast, keeping busy to avoid thinking about her dwindling funds. 3 weeks of wages wouldn't carry her far when the snow cleared, and she'd need to move on soon. The question was where. California, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere William's reach couldn't extend. "Miss Evelyn, might I have a word?" She turned to find a well-dressed man she didn't recognize, though something about him set her nerves on edge. He was perhaps 40, with prematurely gray hair, and the soft look of someone who worked with papers rather than picks. "I don't believe we've met. Mr. Garrison, James Garrison." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I arrived yesterday, just before the worst of the storm. I'm in the employ of the Pinkerton Detective Agency." The coffee pot in Evelyn's hand trembled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "How interesting. What brings a Pinkerton man to Copper Creek?" "Oh, various matters. Missing persons, primarily." His gaze was sharp, studying her reaction. "It's amazing how many people go missing in the territories. Wives leaving husbands, husbands abandoning families. Very sad." "Indeed." She turned away, but he followed. "I wonder if I might show you some photographs. You meet so many people in your line of work. Perhaps you've seen one of these missing souls." It was a test. and they both knew it. To refuse would confirm any suspicions he might harbor. To agree meant looking at pictures that might include her own. Evelyn forced a smile. Of course, though I warn you, I meet so many faces they tend to blur together. Garrison produced a leather folder and began showing her carte de visite photographs. She recognized none of the first few: a young man with worried eyes, an older woman in widow's weeds. Then he turned to one that made her heart stop. It wasn't her own image, but one far worse. Little Thomas Hartley, age 7. William's son from his first marriage. The boy she'd raised as her own for 3 years, who'd clung to her skirts and called her mama, who'd watched from the stairs that last terrible night, eyes wide with fear as his father. Do you recognize this child? Garrison's voice seemed to come from very far away. No. The lie came automatically. Poor thing, is he missing? In a manner of speaking, his father is quite concerned. The boy's stepmother took him from their home without permission, kidnapping, technically, though Mr. Hartley is willing to forgive if she returns voluntarily. The room spun slightly. William had told them she'd taken Thomas? Of course he had. It would give him legal justification for pursuit, make her not just a runaway wife, but a criminal. And Thomas, God, what had become of him? She'd had to leave him behind, had no choice when she fled with nothing but the clothes on her back. She'd told herself William wouldn't hurt his own son, but how terrible, she managed. I do hope the child is safe. As do we all. Garrison tucked the folder away. If you should remember anything, or see anyone matching these descriptions, I'll be staying at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. Once the storm clears? Of course. He tipped his hat and moved away, but Evelyn felt his eyes on her for the rest of the morning. She went through the motions of her work mechanically, mind racing. She needed to leave Copper Creek immediately, storm or no storm. But the snow had turned the world into a prison of white walls and howling wind. That evening, she stood on the small stage again, singing for her supper as always. The crowd was larger, swelled by those trapped in town. Garrison sat at a corner table, nursing a single whiskey, his attention never wavering from her performance. She sang The Willow Garden, that murder ballad that always made rough men cry, pouring her fear and grief into every note. William had loved to hear her sing in their parlor, showing her off to his business associates like a prize horse. He'd loved her voice almost as much as he'd loved controlling it, deciding when she could perform and for whom. Halfway through Silver Dagger, the saloon doors burst open in a swirl of snow and wind. A figure stumbled in, so covered in ice and frost he was barely recognizable as human. It wasn't until he pushed back his frozen hat that Evelyn recognized Macready. He looked terrible, lips blue with cold, ice crystals in his beard, moving with the careful gait of someone fighting off frostbite. Blood stained his left shoulder, visible even through the coating of snow. Tom Brennan rushed to help him to a chair near the stove. Good God, man, what happened? Wolves, Macready said through chattering teeth. Pack of them. Desperate from the storm. Got Belle. His voice caught on the mare's name. Had to put her down. The room erupted in concerned murmurs. Losing a horse in this weather was nearly a death sentence. Martha appeared with blankets and hot coffee, clucking over him like a mother hen. How did you make it back? Someone asked. Walked, followed the creek down. He accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his hands around the mug. Wouldn't recommend it. Evelyn had stopped singing, the words dying in her throat. She watched from the stage as the townspeople rallied around Macready, forgetting their petty divisions in the face of genuine need. His eyes found hers across the room, and she saw something there beyond physical pain, the loss of a companion. Perhaps the only friend he'd allowed himself. She stepped down from the stage, ignoring Garrison's watchful presence, and made her way to Macready's side. Up close, she could see the wolf bite through his torn coat, still seeping blood. That needs tending, she said quietly. Do you have a room? He shook his head. Was planning to head back out come morning. Don't be a fool. The sharpness in her voice surprised them both. "Martha, is there a room available?" "The one at the back's empty," Martha replied, "but it's barely bigger than a closet." "It'll do, Mr. Brennan. Perhaps you could help Mr. McCready upstairs? I'll fetch some medical supplies." She moved with purpose, grateful for something concrete to focus on besides Garrison's suspicious gaze. In St. Louis, she'd often tended William's business associates after their drunken brawls, becoming skilled at stitching cuts and treating bruises. Those same hands that had gentled violent men could surely help one who'd been hurt by nature rather than human cruelty. When she reached the small back room with her supplies, she found McCready sitting on the narrow bed, shirt removed, revealing the angry gash on his shoulder. Tom Brennan hovered uncertainly in the doorway. "Thank you, Tom. I can manage from here." The saloon owner looked scandalized. "Now, Miss Evelyn, it ain't proper. Propriety be damned. The man needs help." She softened her tone. "I've done this before. Please." After Tom left, muttering about scandal, Evelyn set to work cleaning the wound. McCready endured her ministrations in silence, though she could feel the tension in his muscles. "You're lucky," she said, threading a needle. "A few inches lower and it would have hit something vital. Doesn't feel lucky." His voice was rough. "Belle carried me through 5 years of trails. Saved my life more than once. I'm sorry." She began stitching, keeping her touch as gentle as possible. "It's hard, losing something you care about." "Someone," he corrected quietly. Belle was someone, not something. Their eyes met, and again she felt that jolt of recognition. Here was a man who understood that love didn't require human form, that sometimes the bonds with animals were cleaner and truer than those with people. "Tell me about her," she said, returning to her work. As she stitched and bandaged, he talked about his mare, how he'd won her in a poker game in Cheyenne, how she'd learned to open gate latches and steal apples, how she'd once warned him of an ambush by refusing to enter a canyon. His voice grew stronger with the telling, and Evelyn found herself sharing her own story about a cat she'd had as a child, the only creature in her father's house that had shown her unconditional affection. "You're good at this," he observed as she tied off the bandage. "I've had practice." The words came out more bitter than intended. He studied her for a long moment. "That Pinkerton man was watching you tonight." Her hand stilled. "You noticed?" "Hard not to. He's got the look of a hunter who's caught a scent." McCready pulled his torn shirt back on carefully. "None of my business, but if you need help." "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know what it's like to be hunted, and I know William Hartley by reputation." The name hit her like a physical blow. "How?" "Garrison's not as subtle as he thinks. Been asking questions all over town, showing that picture of the boy. Doesn't take much to piece together who he's really looking for." McCready stood, testing his shoulder. "Hartley's reach is long, but it's not infinite. There are places he can't touch. Such as? My cabin, for one. It's remote, defensible. Once this storm breaks—" "No." She backed toward the door. "I brought enough trouble to this town. I won't bring it to your doorstep, too." "Ma'am, Evelyn." Her name sounded different on his lips, gentle but firm. "That storm saved my life tonight. If I'd made it to my cabin, I'd have bled out alone. Sometimes asking for help isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the only strength we've got left." She fled before the tears could fall, before his unexpected kindness could breach the walls she'd built so carefully. But his words followed her to her room, where she sat watching the snow fall and fall, covering the world in a blank white sheet that promised either new beginnings or cold graves. In the saloon below, she could hear voices raised in argument, Garrison's cultured tones against Tom Brennan's defensive bluster. The hunter was closing in, and soon she'd have to choose: keep running alone, or trust a damaged stranger who offered shelter in a cabin on a mountain, far from civilization's rules and reach. Outside, the wind howled its lonely song, and Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cold glass, whispering a prayer for a boy she'd loved and lost, and for the strength to survive whatever came next. The storm broke its fury on the fourth day, leaving Copper Creek buried under 6 feet of snow, but finally quiet. The morning sun reflected off the white landscape with blinding intensity, revealing a world transformed. Icicles hung like dragon's teeth from every roof, and the drifts had reshaped the familiar streets into an alien terrain. Evelyn stood at her window, watching the townspeople emerge like hibernating animals, blinking in the brightness. Below, she could see Garrison already making rounds, his persistent questioning resuming with the weather's improvement. Time had run out. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. She opened the door to find MacCready, his shoulder still bandaged, but his color much improved. He wore a heavy coat she didn't recognize, probably borrowed, and carried a second bundle. "The livery's opening up," he said without preamble. "Murphy's got a mare he's willing to sell. Nothing fancy, but she's mountain bred and steady. That's good news for you." "For us." He held out the bundle. Another coat, thick wool lined with fur. "If you're coming." She stared at the offered coat, her throat tight. "Mr. MacCready. Jonah. Jonah?" The name felt foreign on her tongue. "You don't understand. If Garrison follows—" "He won't." There was quiet confidence in his voice. "Not where we're going, not in this snow. By the time he can mount a pursuit, our tracks will be covered." From below came the sound of raised voices, Garrison's distinctive tones, now with an edge of authority. He must have received confirmation by telegraph. "Orders to detain her." Evelyn's hands shook as she reached for the coat. "I have nothing to pay you with. I'm not asking for payment. Men always want payment, one way or another." His jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not most men, and you're not most women. Make your choice, Evelyn. But make it now." She looked around the small room that had been her refuge for 3 weeks, at the cracked mirror, the narrow bed, the water-stained walls. Such a small life, compressed into rented spaces and false names. Through the thin floor, she could hear boots on the stairs. Heavy boots, climbing with purpose. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes." He helped her into the coat, his movements efficient but careful. "Do you have anything you need?" She grabbed her small carpet bag. Everything she owned fitting too easily into its worn confines. The derringer went into the coat's deep pocket, a cold comfort against her hip. "I'm ready. There's a back stairs through the kitchen. Martha's expecting us." They moved quickly through the narrow hallway, Evelyn's heart pounding with each step. Behind them, a fist hammered on her door. Garrison's voice, muffled but commanding. "Mrs. Hartley, I need to speak with you. Official business." Martha Brennan waited at the bottom of the service stairs, her face set in determined lines. She pressed a cloth-wrapped bundle into Evelyn's hands. "Food for the journey." "You take care," Martha whispered fiercely. "Both of you." Tom appeared from the front room, deliberately loud. "That you, Mr. Garrison?" "Miss Evelyn stepped out early this morning. Said something about visiting the church. It would buy them minutes, maybe half an hour." Jonah led the way through the kitchen and out into the alley, where the snow lay virgin and deep. Each step was a struggle, but fear lent Evelyn strength. They pushed through the drifts to the livery's rear entrance. Murphy had 2 horses saddled and ready, a bay mare with a white blaze and a sturdy gray gelding. The old Irishman helped Evelyn mount, his weathered face carefully neutral. "Never seen you this morning," he said to Jonah. "Been mucking stalls since dawn, haven't noticed a thing." Jonah pressed coins into his hand. "Obliged. Murphy, you just take care. That's a bad trail in good weather." They rode out the back way, keeping to the alleys until they reached the edge of town. Then Jonah turned north, toward the mountains that rose like white monuments against the crystal sky. The horses struggled through the deep snow, but they were indeed mountain-bred, with the broad chests and steady temperaments needed for such work. Behind them, Copper Creek grew smaller, its buildings becoming toy-like with distance. Evelyn didn't look back. She'd learned that lesson in St. Louis. Looking back only made the leaving harder. The trail, such as it was, wound upward through stands of pine and aspen. The trees wore heavy mantles of snow, their branches bowing under the weight. Everything was silence except for the crunch of hooves and the occasional crack of a branch giving way. "How far?" she asked when they paused to rest the horses. 15 miles, maybe more with the drifts. Jonah scanned the horizon with practiced eyes. "We'll need to push hard to make it before dark." They rode on, climbing always upward. The air grew thinner, colder, burning in Evelyn's lungs. Her hands went numb inside her gloves, and her face felt raw from the wind. But she didn't complain. Whatever lay ahead had to be better than what waited behind. At midday, they stopped in a sheltered grove to rest and eat. Jonah built a small fire with practiced efficiency, and they shared Martha's provisions: cold biscuits, dried beef, and coffee brewed in a battered pot he produced from his saddlebags. "Tell me about Texas," Evelyn said suddenly. The question surprised them both. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Not much to tell. I was younger, angrier, thought I could make a life there, maybe find some peace after the war. But peace has a way of avoiding men like me." "The war?" "I rode with Quantrill for a time." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "Did things I'm not proud of. When it ended, I drifted south, hired on with a cattle outfit. That's where I met Jake Morrison." He told the story simply. A dispute over wages, accusations of rustling, tempers flaring in a saloon. Morrison and 2 friends, all armed, all drunk. Jonah faster, steadier, luckier. 3 men dead in as many seconds. "Self-defense," he concluded. Judge agreed, but Morrison had family, friends, the kind that don't forget. "So you ran." "So I ran." He met her eyes across the small fire. "Been running ever since. Thought I'd found a place to stop up here. But," he shrugged, favoring his wounded shoulder, "but you're giving it up for me. I'm sharing it. There's a difference." He kicked snow over the fire. "We should move. Weather's building again." He was right. Clouds were massing over the peaks, dark and pregnant with snow. They mounted up and continued climbing, the trail growing ever steeper and more treacherous. In places, it disappeared entirely, and Jonah had to dismount to lead the horses through drifts that reached his waist. They came to a narrow bridge, spanning a deep gorge. The wooden structure groaned under its burden of snow and ice, looking barely substantial enough to support a man, let alone horses. "Is there another way?" Evelyn tried to keep the fear from her voice. "Not unless you want to add 2 days to the journey." Jonah studied the bridge critically. "It's stronger than it looks. Built it myself 3 summers ago, but we'll need to cross one at a time." He went first, leading his gelding with careful steps. The boards creaked ominously, and chunks of ice fell into the gorge below, taking forever to hit bottom. But the bridge held. Evelyn's turn. Her mare balked at first, sensing danger. She had to dismount, speaking softly, coaxing the animal forward step by careful step. Halfway across, a board cracked under her weight. For a heart-stopping moment, she felt it give way, saw the yawning chasm below. Then Jonah's hand was there, steady and strong, pulling her forward. "Don't look down, just walk." She fixed her eyes on his face, let his calm certainty guide her, step by step, board by board, until suddenly she was across, legs shaking with relief. He steadied her, his hands warm even through her coat. "You did fine," he said softly. "Real fine." They were close now, close enough that she could see the lines weathering had carved around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. For a moment, something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or simply the bond of shared danger survived. Then the moment broke. He stepped back, checking the horses, and they continued on. But something had shifted. Some wall had cracked like that board on the bridge. The snow began again as they followed a frozen stream up a narrow valley. Fat flakes at first, then driving sheets that made it hard to see 10 feet ahead. Jonah led with unerring instinct, following landmarks invisible to Evelyn's eyes. "There," he said finally, pointing through the white veil. "Home." The cabin materialized out of the storm like something from a fairy tale. It was small but solid, built of thick logs chinked with mud and moss. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a lean-to shelter extended from one side. It nestled in a grove of pines that provided protection from the worst of the wind. Jonah led the horses into the shelter, working quickly to unsaddle and feed them. Evelyn stood in the swirling snow, looking at this place that would be her refuge. It was the end of the earth, as far from civilization as she could imagine. Perfect, inside. The cabin was a single room with a sleeping loft above. Everything was neat, Spartanly clean. Speaking of a man who'd learned to live with his own company. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold now but promising warmth. Shelves held supplies, canned goods, sacks of flour and beans, medicine bottles. A rifle hung on pegs above the door. Jonah entered with an armload of wood, stamping snow from his boots. "I'll get a fire going. There's water in that bucket, coffee in the tin. Make yourself—" He paused, seeming to realize the strangeness of the situation. "Make yourself at home." Home, such a simple word for such a complicated thing. Evelyn removed her coat, hanging it on a peg, and set about making coffee while he built the fire. The domestic routine felt surreal after the morning's flight, as if she'd stepped from one life into another between heartbeats. Soon the fire crackled warmly, pushing back the cold. They sat on either side of it, sipping coffee, letting the heat soak into frozen bones. Outside, the storm raged, but inside was an island of calm. "Thank you," Evelyn said finally. "I know what you've risked." "Maybe I'm tired of being alone." The admission seemed to surprise him. "Maybe I figured 2 ghosts are better than 1. She thought of all the nights in all the towns, singing to rooms full of strangers, smiling at their applause while feeling nothing but emptiness inside. Of William's hands on her throat, his voice honey-sweet in public and vicious in private. Of little Thomas calling for her as she ran into the darkness. "Ghosts," she agreed softly. "Yes, we both have those." The storm howled outside, but within the circle of firelight, something fragile and precious began to take root. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of understanding. 2 damaged souls, finding shelter together against the cold. As night fell and the world disappeared into white fury, Evelyn allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that she might finally have found a place to stop running. The storm raged for 2 days, sealing them in a world of white silence. Inside the cabin, they developed a careful routine, dancing around each other in the small space like polite strangers. Jonah slept in the loft, giving Evelyn the bed near the fire. They cooked simple meals together, shared stories in measured doses, and pretended not to notice the growing tension between them. On the second night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. The wind had died to a whisper, but the cold was brutal, seeping through the chinks in the logs despite the fire. She lay under every blanket in the cabin, still shivering, when she heard movement from the loft. "You're cold," Jonah said. It wasn't a question. "I'm fine." "No, you're not. I can hear your teeth chattering from up here." He climbed down the ladder, moving stiffly. His shoulder was healing but still pained him. "This cold's different from what you're used to. Mountain cold gets into your bones." He added more wood to the fire, then pulled his chair closer to her bed. "When I first came here, I nearly froze that first winter. Had to learn the hard way how to survive it." "How?" Her voice was small, muffled by blankets. "Body heat, mostly. The old mountain men knew. Sometimes sharing warmth is the only way to make it through." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll sit here. Keep the fire going. That should help." She watched him settle into the chair, saw him wince as his shoulder protested. This man who'd saved her, who asked nothing in return, who was now prepared to sit up all night to keep her warm. The walls she'd built so carefully began to crack. "That's foolish," she said softly. You need rest too. I've spent plenty of nights in that chair. Jonah. She spoke his name like a prayer. Please. He understood what she was offering. Not her body, but her trust. Slowly, carefully. He lay down beside her on top of the blankets, maintaining a careful distance, but warmth was warmth. And soon that distance closed. She turned toward him, drawn like a moth to flame, and found herself pressed against his solid presence. Better? His voice rumbled through his chest. Yes. She was trembling now, but not from cold. Tell me something. Anything. I need... She didn't know how to finish. So he talked, his voice low and soothing in the darkness. He told her about learning to read weather signs, about the family of foxes that den near the cabin each spring, about the northern lights that sometimes danced across the winter sky. Safe things, gentle things, while outside the world froze solid. Why did you really help me? She asked when he fell silent. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, maybe because I recognized something in you. The way you held yourself in that saloon, like you were ready to fight or flee at any moment. I know that feeling. And if Garrison comes, then we'll face it together. His arm tightened around her, protective. I'm done running. Evelyn, whatever comes, I'm done running. She began to cry then, silently, tears soaking into his shirt. For Thomas, for the life she'd lost, for the years of fear and pain. He held her through it, asking nothing, offering only presence. When the tears finally stopped, she found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone. About her marriage to William, how charming he'd been during their courtship, how that charm had turned to control and then to violence. About the first time he'd struck her, the shock of it, the apologies that followed, how she'd believed it would never happen again. But it always happens again, she whispered. Each time worse than before. Each time with better reasons why it was my fault. It wasn't your fault. His voice was fierce. None of it was your fault. She told him about Thomas then. William's son who'd become hers in every way that mattered. How the boy had tried to protect her, standing between them with his small body. How that had only enraged William more. I should have taken him, she said. When I ran, I should have found a way. You'd both be dead now if you had. Men like Hartley don't forgive that kind of defiance. How do you know? Because I've known men like him, fought beside them. Sometimes, men who mistake fear for respect, who need to control everything around them because they can't control what's inside. His hand found hers in the darkness. You survived. That took more courage than any gunfight. They lay in silence then, listening to the fire pop and settle. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving a profound quiet in its wake. In that quiet, something shifted between them, some barrier dissolving like snow in spring. Evelyn, he said softly. She lifted her head to look at him. In the firelight, his face was all plains and shadows, but his eyes were warm. Another winter alone? She whispered, echoing words she hadn't yet spoken. Or take me now. It wasn't about desire, not entirely. It was about choosing life over mere survival, about reaching for warmth in a cold world. He understood that. She could see it in his eyes. Are you sure? He asked. Instead of answering, she pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first. Two people remembering how to be gentle, then deeper, hungrier, full of all the loneliness they'd both carried for so long. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, he touched her face with wondering fingers. I don't want to be another man who takes from you. You're not taking, I'm giving. There's a difference. She kissed him again, softer this time. Just be patient with me. It's been a long time since touch meant anything but pain. He was patient, achingly so. Each caress a question, each kiss a promise. When old fears surfaced, a movement too quick, a touch too firm, he stopped, waited, let her set the pace. In that cold cabin warmed by fire and flesh, Evelyn rediscovered what it meant to want and be wanted, to give and receive in equal measure. Later, they lay entwined, watching the fire die to embers. She traced the scars on his chest, knife wounds, bullet grazes, the map of a violent life, while he played with her unbound hair. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live, one day at a time, if that's what it takes. And when spring comes, then we decide, together." He pulled her closer. "I meant what I said. I'm done running. This is my stand. Evelyn, our stand, if you'll have it." She thought of all the towns she'd fled, all the rooms she'd left in the night, the constant fear, the endless movement. Could she really stop here, in this cabin at the end of the world, with this man who'd shown her more kindness in days than she'd known in years? "I want to try," she said finally. "But I'm afraid, not of you," she added quickly, "of hoping, of believing this could last. Nothing lasts forever, but some things are worth having for however long we get them." He kissed her forehead. "Sleep now. We'll face tomorrow when it comes." She did sleep then, deeper than she had in months. No dreams chased her. No phantom footsteps made her bolt upright. Just warmth and safety and the steady beat of his heart under her ear. Dawn came late and pale, filtered through frost-covered windows. Evelyn woke to find herself alone in the bed, panic flaring until she heard Jonah moving about the cabin, stoking the fire, making coffee. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, the kind that meant home. She dressed quickly and found him standing at the window, looking out at the transformed world. The storm had sculpted the snow into fantastic shapes, drifts like frozen waves, trees buried to their crowns. Everything sparkled in the weak sunlight. "Beautiful," she said, coming to stand beside him. "Deadly, too. That snow's unstable. Come afternoon, when the sun hits those slopes." He gestured toward the mountainsides. "Avalanches. We'll need to stay close to the cabin for a few days." A few days. A gift of time, isolated from the world and its dangers. She leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her automatically. "I could sing for you," she offered. "If you'd like. My voice isn't just for saloons." "I'd like that." So she sang as they went about the morning chores, old ballads her mother had taught her, hymns from childhood, even some of the bawdy songs that made cowboys whoop. Her voice filled the small space, no longer edged with fear, but warm and full. He smiled more that morning than she'd seen him smile since they'd met. When she finished a particularly ribald tune about a farmer's daughter, he actually laughed, a rusty sound, but genuine. "You're full of surprises. Evelyn Taylor." He used the false name she'd given in Copper Creek, but somehow it didn't matter. "That's not my real name," she admitted. "I know. Evelyn is real. The rest." She shrugged. "I've been so many people I sometimes forget who I started as. Names don't matter much out here. You're who you choose to be." She helped him tend the horses, learning how to break ice from water buckets and portion out feed. The animals had weathered the storm well in their shelter, and the mare she'd ridden had already accepted her, nuzzling her pockets for treats. "She likes you," Jonah observed. "That's a good sign. Horses know people better than people know themselves." "What does your horse know about you?" "That I'm reliable with oats and bad with affection." He patted the gelding's neck awkwardly, though maybe that's changing. They were standing close in the small shelter, and Evelyn felt that pull again, that warmth that had nothing to do with shared body heat. She raised her hand to touch his face, marveling at how natural it felt. "Evelyn." Her name was a caress. "Last night was perfect," she finished. "Don't apologize or analyze or whatever you're about to do. It was perfect." He kissed her then, there in the hay-scented dimness with the horses looking on incuriously. When they broke apart, she saw wonder in his eyes, as if he too was remembering what it meant to feel joy. The day passed in a blur of small intimacies, cooking together, their movements synchronized without words, mending clothes by the fire, sharing stories of childhood, playing cards with a worn deck he produced from somewhere, laughing when she proved to be a shameless cheat. As afternoon sun slanted through the windows, they heard it, a rumbling like distant thunder. They rushed to the window in time to see a whole mountainside let loose. Thousands of tons of snow cascading down in a white cloud. "There go our tracks," Jonah said with satisfaction. "Anyone trying to follow will have to wait for spring thaw now." Safety. The word tasted foreign in Evelyn's mouth, but she was beginning to believe in it. Here in this cabin, with this man, she might actually be safe. That night, she went to him willingly, eagerly. No hesitation now, no ghosts between them, just two people choosing each other, choosing life, choosing to believe that broken things could be mended with patience and care. "Another winter alone," she whispered against his throat. "Or take me now." "Now," he answered. "Always now." And in that moment, with the world locked in ice outside but warmth blooming between them, Evelyn felt something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. It was fragile as frost flowers, precious as spring water, but it was there, a beginning. The morning came too bright and too still. Jonah woke with the instinct of a man who'd survived by reading danger in silence, his body tensing before his mind caught up. Beside him, Evelyn stirred but didn't wake, her face peaceful in the pale light. He slipped from the bed carefully, reaching for his rifle. The horses were restless. He could hear them through the wall, stamping and whickering in their shelter. Moving to the window, he scraped frost from the glass and peered out. Nothing moved in the pristine snow, but tracks led from the tree line. Fresh tracks, too deliberate to be wildlife. "How many?" Evelyn's voice was steady behind him. She'd woken without sound, already reaching for her derringer. "3, maybe 4. He didn't sugarcoat it. "They're watching, waiting for something." She joined him at the window, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Garrison?" "Could be, or Morrison's people finally caught up." He checked the rifle's load, mind already calculating angles and ammunition, or just drifters looking for shelter. But they both knew better. Drifters didn't circle a cabin like wolves, didn't leave tracks that showed military precision. Someone had come calling, and not with good intentions. "There's a root cellar," Jonah said quietly, "beneath the floor. If things go bad, I'm not hiding while you fight." The steel in her voice reminded him she'd survived Hartley, survived years of fear. "We stand together, remember?" Before he could argue, a voice called from outside, cultured, commanding, familiar. "Mrs. Hartley? Mr. McCready, I believe we need to have a conversation." "Garrison," Jonah felt Evelyn go rigid beside him. "I have a warrant." The Pinkerton continued. "Legal papers from Missouri, but I'd prefer to handle this civilized-like. No need for bloodshed. Civilized men don't hunt women like animals." Jonah called back. "I'm hunting a kidnapper, Mr. McCready, a woman who stole a child from his rightful home. The law's clear on such matters." Evelyn's knuckles were white on the windowsill. "He's lying," she whispered. "I never—" "I know." Jonah squeezed her shoulder. "How many men you got with you? Garrison?" "Enough, but like I said, I'd prefer to avoid violence. Send Mrs. Hartley out, and you can go back to your hermit life. This doesn't concern you." Anyone under my roof is my concern." There was a pause. Then, "I'd heard you were stubborn." "Very well. We'll do this the hard way." The first shot shattered the window, showering them with glass. Jonah pulled Evelyn down, covering her with his body as more bullets thudded into the logs. He crawled to the other window, risking a quick look. 3 men that he could see, one behind the wood pile, another using a pine tree for cover, Garrison himself standing bold as brass in the open. "Stay low," he told Evelyn. "They're trying to panic us. Make us run. The logs will stop most anything they're shooting." But even as he spoke, smoke began seeping through the back wall. His heart sank. Fire, the oldest trick and the most effective. In this cold, with everything inside dry as tinder, the cabin would go up fast. "The horses," Evelyn said urgently. He nodded. If they lost their mounts, they were done for. "Can you shoot?" "Well enough." He handed her his revolver. "Cover the front. I'll try for the shelter." "Jonah." "No time." He kissed her hard. Quick. Whatever happens, don't let them take you alive. Promise me. I promise. He went out the side window in a rush, rifle in hand. A bullet tugged at his coat, but he made the shelter, throwing open the doors. The horses were wild-eyed with fear, smoke already reaching them. He cut their tethers, slapping their rumps to drive them out. Go, get! They bolted into the snow, and immediately gunfire erupted. One of Garrison's men had been waiting. Jonah saw the mare stumble, red blooming on her white shoulder, but she kept running. The gelding followed, both animals disappearing into the trees. More shots from the cabin, Evelyn holding her own. Pride and fear warred in his chest as he worked his way along the shelter wall, trying to flank the man behind the woodpile. The smoke was thicker now, flames visible through the cabin's back wall, time running out with each heartbeat. He saw movement, fired, heard a cry. One down, but where were the others? McCready! Garrison's voice, closer now. This is pointless. The cabin's lost. Save the woman and yourself. Jonah broke cover, sprinting for a better position. Pain exploded through his side, a lucky shot or a skilled one. Didn't matter. He stumbled, went down on one knee, blood, warm and too much of it. Through blurring vision, he saw Evelyn burst from the burning cabin. She'd found his ammunition, had the rifle now, firing with desperate accuracy. Another of Garrison's men fell, but Garrison himself was moving, circling, patient as a hunter. Evelyn! Jonah tried to shout warning, but his voice came out weak. She turned, saw him bleeding in the snow, and something fierce crossed her face. She swung the rifle toward Garrison, but the Pinkerton was already too close. Knocking the weapon aside, they grappled, Evelyn fighting with cornered fury, but Garrison was larger, stronger. Jonah forced himself up, stumbling toward them. His revolver, where was it? Still with Evelyn, somewhere in the snow. The world tilted, his side screaming, but he kept moving. Garrison had Evelyn's arm twisted behind her back now, his own pistol pressed to her temple. Enough, McCready! Throw down your weapons! I don't see any weapons, Jonah said, spreading his empty hands. He was 10 feet away, swaying but upright. Looks like you win, Garrison. Smart man, Mrs. Hartley. You'll come quietly now. Evelyn's eyes found Jonah's. So much in that look. Apology, love, farewell. Tell Thomas I loved him, she said softly. If you ever get the chance. Evelyn, no. She moved faster than thought, twisting in Garrison's grip, going for the derringer he'd missed in her skirts. The small gun came up, not aimed at Garrison, but pressed under her own chin. No! Garrison and Jonah shouted together. I promised, she said to Jonah, tears streaming. I won't go back. I won't. Please. Garrison's voice had lost its command. Mrs. Hartley, your husband just wants you home. The boy needs his mother. I'm not his mother, and that house was never home. Her thumb cocked the hammer. Let me go, Mr. Garrison. Tell William I died. It's true enough. I can't do that. Then you'll have to carry back a corpse. The moment stretched taut as wire. Behind them, the cabin collapsed in a shower of sparks. 3 years of Jonah's life reduced to ember and ash. But he didn't care. All that mattered was the woman holding death in her small hand. There's another way, he heard himself say. Both Evelyn and Garrison looked at him. You want to bring back Mrs. William Hartley, but what if she's not Mrs. Hartley anymore? Garrison's eyes narrowed. Meaning. Mountain marriages might not hold up in Missouri courts, but they're legal enough here. Jonah stepped closer, fighting to stay conscious. Hard to force a woman back to one husband when she's wed to another. You're proposing to me? Evelyn's voice held wonder. Now? If you'll have me, bleeding and all. This is ridiculous, Garrison protested. You can't just... Yes, Evelyn interrupted. Yes, I'll have you. Jonah reached into his pocket, pulled out his mother's ring, the one thing of value he'd kept through all his wandering. Gold worn thin by years, but still solid. Then before God and this witness, I take you as my wife, to have and hold, in sickness and health, till death parts us." Evelyn lowered the derringer, sliding the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. "And I take you as my husband, to have and hold, through storm and sunshine, till death parts us." "This won't stand," Garrison said, but uncertainty colored his voice. "Hartley has lawyers, influence, and I have a wife to protect." Jonah swayed, caught himself. "Your move, Garrison. Take her over my dead body, or go back and tell Hartley she's beyond his reach." The Pinkerton stood frozen, calculating. Behind his professional facade, Jonah glimpsed something almost human, a man tired of hunting, perhaps, or one who'd seen too many desperate women choose death over capture. Finally, Garrison stepped back, holstering his weapon. "She died in the fire," he said quietly. "Tragic accident. No survivors." "Garrison," Evelyn started. "The boy's better off believing that than knowing his stepmother chose to abandon him." His voice hardened. "But if I see either of you again, if you come within 100 miles of Missouri, I'll finish this job. Clear?" "Clear," Jonah managed. Garrison looked at his fallen men, shook his head. "I'll need help getting them down the mountain." "Town's that way." Jonah pointed south. "Follow the creek." Without another word, the Pinkerton turned and walked into the trees. They watched until he vanished, neither quite believing it was over. Then Jonah's knees gave out. He hit the snow hard, the white around him turning red. Evelyn was there instantly, pressing her hands to his side, stemming the flow. "Don't you dare," she said fiercely. "You just married me. You don't get to die now." "Wouldn't dream of it," he mumbled. Then darkness took him. He woke to warmth and the smell of pine. For a confused moment, he thought the cabin fire had been a dream. Then pain lanced through his side, and memory crashed back. "Easy," Evelyn's voice, close and concerned. "Don't try to move." He opened his eyes to find himself in a lean-to of pine boughs, wrapped in blankets that smelled of smoke. A small fire crackled nearby, and Evelyn sat beside him, looking haggard but alive. "How?" "The horses came back," she said. "The mare's hurt but mobile. I got you onto the gelding, found this spot." She touched his face gently. "I've been trying to keep you warm. But the fever..." "How long?" "2 days. I thought..." Her voice broke. "I thought I'd lose you, too." He caught her hand, felt the ring on her finger. "Still married?" "Still married." A watery smile. "Though you missed the wedding night. We'll have others." He tried to sit up, gasped at the pain. "We need to move. Find shelter. There's an old trapper's shack about 5 miles east. I scouted yesterday while you slept. It's rough, but it'll do until you're stronger." "Smart woman. I had a good teacher." She leaned down, kissed him softly. "Rest now. I'll keep watch." But he caught her arm as she moved away. "Evelyn, what I said to Garrison about marriage, I meant it, not just to save you. I meant every word." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I know," she said finally. "That's what terrifies me. I've been running so long. Jonah, I don't know how to stop." "Then we'll learn together, one day at a time." "You make it sound simple." "Simple things usually are. It's people who make them complicated." He pulled her down beside him, ignoring the protest from his side. "We've got nothing now." "No cabin, limited supplies. Winter still fierce around us, but we've got each other." "Another winter alone," she murmured. "Or take you now." "You already took me. 3 days ago in front of a Pinkerton detective, if memory serves." She laughed then, the first real laugh he'd heard from her. It transformed her face, chasing away the shadows. "Jonah McCready, are you always this romantic?" "Only when I'm shot and feverish. Mrs. McCready." Mrs. McCready. The name hung between them, foreign and thrilling. Outside their makeshift shelter, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, but inside, wrapped in smoke-stained blankets and impossible hope, 2 souls who'd run out of places to run finally found a reason to stand still. The journey back to Copper Creek took 3 agonizing days. Jonah drifted in and out of consciousness, tied to the saddle while Evelyn led both horses through the treacherous mountain passes. The wounded mare limped but kept moving, as if understanding the urgency. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, Evelyn was near collapse herself, running on determination alone. Murphy saw them first, rushing from his livery with surprising speed for his age. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph! Get Doc Morrison, quick!" he shouted to his stable boy, then helped ease Jonah from the saddle. "Not Morrison," Jonah mumbled through his delirium. "Jake Morrison's kin. Different Morrison," Murphy assured him. "Doc's good people. Come on now, let's get you inside." Word spread fast in a small town. By the time they'd carried Jonah to the doctor's office, half of Copper Creek had gathered in the street. Evelyn glimpsed familiar faces. Martha Brennan wringing her hands, Tom standing protective beside her. Even some of the miners who'd frequented her performances. Doc Morrison proved to be a thin, careful man with gentle hands. He examined Jonah's wound with professional detachment while Evelyn hovered nearby, still wearing men's clothing she'd found in the burned cabin's root cellar, still smelling of smoke and fear. "Bullet's still in there," the doctor announced. "Infection set in. I'll need to operate immediately." "Will he?" Evelyn couldn't finish the question. "He's strong, and you did well keeping the wound clean, but I won't lie, it's serious." He began preparing his instruments. "You'll need to wait outside." "I'm staying." The doctor looked ready to argue, then saw something in her face that changed his mind. "Very well, but if you faint, you're on your own." She didn't faint. She held Jonah's hand through the surgery, whispered prayers and promises while the doctor worked. When it was over, when the bullet lay in a metal dish and Jonah's breathing had steadied, she finally allowed herself to cry. "He'll need constant care," Doc Morrison said, washing blood from his hands. "Fever could still take him. Is there family to notify?" "I'm his family." The ring on her finger caught the lamplight. "I'm his wife." The doctor's eyebrows rose, but he merely nodded. "Then you'll want to get him somewhere more comfortable. Martha Brennan has rooms." "No." A new voice from the doorway. Sheriff Ben Curtis, a fair-minded man who'd kept order in Copper Creek for a decade. "There's questions need answering first, like why Garrison's back in town with 2 dead men and a story about fire and fugitives." Evelyn's hand went instinctively to where her derringer should be. Finding only empty fabric, Curtis noticed the gesture, his weathered face unreadable. "Easy now, ma'am. Nobody's arresting anyone just yet, but I need to know what happened up on Eagle's Nest." "Sheriff," Doc Morrison intervened. "This man needs rest, not interrogation. And he'll get it, soon as I understand why there's blood on my mountain." Curtis pulled up a chair, settling in with the patience of a man who'd waited out claim jumpers and cattle thieves. "Start from the beginning, Mrs. McCready." She lifted her chin. "Mrs. Jonah McCready." So she told it, or most of it. The flight from town, the storm, the cabin, Garrison's arrival with armed men, their demand for her surrender, the fire. She let them think it was accident in the fight. Jonah wounded defending her, Garrison's men dead in the crossfire, the Pinkerton retreating when faced with mountain justice. "And this marriage?" Curtis asked when she finished. "Legal and binding, witnessed by Garrison himself. Convenient, Sheriff." Martha Brennan had entered during the tale. "You've known Jonah McCready for 3 years. He's never caused trouble, never drew his gun except when forced. If he says they were defending themselves, I believe him." A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd that had gathered in the doctor's office. Evelyn recognized the dynamics. Jonah might be a loner, but he was their loner. Garrison was the outsider, the city man bringing city trouble to their mountains. Curtis sighed, rubbing his jaw. "Garrison's already filed his report. Says the woman he was tracking died in the fire. No survivors found. Seems inclined to leave it at that." "Then there's no problem," Tom Brennan said firmly. "No problem except 2 dead men and a burned cabin." Curtis stood. "But if Garrison's not pressing charges, and if those men fired first as misses, McCready claims. He put on his hat. I'll need sworn statements when your husband's able. For now, consider yourselves guests of Copper Creek, but don't think about leaving until this is settled. The crowd dispersed slowly, curiosity satisfied for the moment. Martha immediately took charge, arranging for Jonah to be moved to her boarding house's best room. The miners carried him gently, these rough men showing unexpected tenderness. Once settled, Evelyn finally allowed Martha to fuss over her clean clothes, hot food, a basin to wash away days of fear and flight. But she wouldn't leave Jonah's side for long, returning to sit vigil as fever ravaged his body. For 2 days he burned, thrashing and calling out names she didn't recognize, battles she could only imagine. She bathed his forehead with cool cloths, spooned broth between cracked lips, sang the old ballads that had once earned her supper. Martha brought meals, Doc Morrison checked wounds, and slowly the town closed protective ranks around them. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. Jonah opened clear eyes to find Evelyn asleep in the chair beside him, her hand still clasping his. He studied her face in the dawn light, the exhaustion, the worry lines, the fierce devotion that had kept her there. "Hey," he whispered. Her eyes flew open. "You're awake, really awake." "Seems so. Where?" "Copper Creek, Martha's boarding house." She pressed her hand to his forehead, confirming the fever's retreat. "You scared me." "Sorry. Been told I'm inconsiderate that way." He tried to sit up, winced. "Garrison?" "Gone. Claims I died in the fire." "Good. Our story?" "Self-defense. Sheriff Curtis seems inclined to believe it, especially since Garrison's not disputing." She helped him sip water. "The whole town knows we're married now." "Regrets?" "None." She meant it, surprising herself. "You?" "Only that our wedding night involved gunfire and blood loss. We'll have better ones." She echoed his words from the mountain. A knock interrupted them. Martha entered with a breakfast tray, beaming to see Jonah conscious. Behind her came an unexpected visitor, Samuel Chen, who ran the general store with his wife after Ben Tucker's death. "Mr. Chen," Jonah greeted carefully. The Chinese merchants faced enough prejudice without adding association with trouble. "Mr. McCready." Chen bowed slightly. "I come with proposition. Your cabin burned. Yes, you need supplies to rebuild. I need protection for supply wagons. Too many robberies lately. Perhaps we make arrangement?" It was generous, more than generous. Credit extended to a man who'd just been shot, who had no collateral left but his reputation. Evelyn saw Jonah's throat work with emotion. I appreciate that, Mr. Chen." "Good. We discuss details when you're stronger." Chen turned to Evelyn. "My wife asks, you still sing? The Gilded Lady misses your voice." She glanced at Jonah. "The lady sings when and where she chooses." Jonah said firmly, "But I reckon Copper Creek could use some music come spring." Chen smiled and departed. Martha bustled about the room, chattering about town gossip, but Evelyn caught the significant looks she kept throwing their way. The town had made its decision. They belonged now. This strange couple bound by fire and lead. Sheriff Curtis arrived that afternoon, taking their statements with professional thoroughness. He asked hard questions but seemed satisfied with the answers. When he left, they heard him talking to someone in the hall. "Case is closed, far as I'm concerned. Man's got a right to defend his home and wife. Those Pinkerton boys should have known better than to bring city justice to mountain territory." Days passed in slow recovery. Jonah grew stronger, able to sit up, then stand, then take careful walks around the room. Evelyn never left his side except for necessities. They talked through the long hours, really talked, sharing stories they'd only hinted at before. His service in the war, the things that still haunted his dreams. Her childhood in Ohio, her first marriage to a kind man who'd died of consumption, leaving her vulnerable to William Hartley's apparent charm. "I wasn't always afraid," she told him one evening as snow fell outside the window. "I used to be brave, I think. Adventurous, even. You're still brave. Bravest woman I know. I held a gun to my own head. To avoid a worse fate, that's not cowardice. Evelyn, that's knowing your own mind. He pulled her closer on the bed where she'd finally agreed to lie beside him. Besides, you married me in the middle of a gunfight. Can't get much braver than that. She laughed softly. That was rather dramatic, wasn't it? I prefer memorable. A week after their return, unexpected news arrived. Young Timothy Burke, who worked at the telegraph office, came running with a message. William Hartley was dead, shot by a business rival in St. Louis. Some dispute over territory and whiskey rights. Evelyn stared at the telegram, reading it 3 times before the words sank in. He's gone, really gone. How do you feel about that? She considered. Free, and sad for Thomas. Whatever William was, he was still the boy's father. The boy has family. William's sister in Boston. A good woman, from what I remember. She never approved of the marriage. Evelyn folded the telegram carefully. Perhaps someday, when enough time has passed, I could write to her. Let her know. Let her know I cared for him. Someday. Jonah agreed. The town rallied to help them rebuild. As soon as travel was possible, work parties headed up to Eagle's Nest. The cabin rose again from the ashes, stronger than before, with improvements suggested by neighbors who'd survived their own harsh winters. Chen's credit proved generous, and other merchants followed suit. By the time spring touched the mountains with green, they had a home again. But something had changed in those weeks of recovery. The isolation Jonah had once craved no longer called to him. Evelyn's voice in The Gilded Lady had drawn crowds all winter, her performances now free of the haunted quality that had first caught his attention. They'd found a place in Copper Creek's heart, and maybe it was time to stop running from community as well as the past. We could build a second cabin, Evelyn suggested one evening as they sat on their new porch, watching the sunset paint the peaks gold. For guests, Martha's been talking about expanding her boarding house business. Could run cattle in the lower meadow, Jonah added. Murphy knows a man selling good stock. I could teach music to the miners' children. Several families have asked. We could live, he said simply. Not just survive, actually live. She took his hand, feeling the calluses from rebuilding, the strength that had defended her. Together, no other way I'd want it. Spring ran toward summer, and with it came a letter forwarded through 3 towns. Thomas's aunt in Boston, writing with tearful thanks for news of her nephew's well-being during his stepmother's time in the household. An invitation, carefully worded, to correspond further. Perhaps even visit when memories weren't so raw. Would you want to? Jonah asked, finding Evelyn crying over the letter. Maybe, someday, when we're more sure of who we are now. She wiped her eyes. Is that selfish? That's human. The boy has family who love him. You can add to that when you're ready, not before. Sheriff Curtis stopped by that afternoon, sharing coffee and news. Garrison had been through Denver, apparently, heading east with reports of successful recoveries and one tragic fire. No mention of survivors. Man knows how to read the wind, Curtis observed. Smart enough to know when a trail's gone cold, or when following it might cost more than it's worth, Jonah suggested. That too. Curtis set down his cup. You two planning on staying in these parts? Where else would we go? Evelyn asked. Good. Town needs good people. And that voice of yours. Ma'am, well, it makes the winter nights shorter. After he left, they sat in comfortable silence. The cabin was full of small touches now. Curtains Evelyn had sewn, books on the shelves, a rocking chair Jonah was crafting for the porch. Home, in ways the old cabin had never been. No regrets? Jonah asked again, as he did sometimes, still marveling that she'd chosen to stay. None, Evelyn answered, as she always did. Then, softer, another winter alone, or take me now? Now, he said, pulling her into his arms. Always now. Every winter, every summer, every day between. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, somewhere in the valley. A wolf howled, not threatening now, just wild and free. Inside the cabin, lamps were lit against the darkness. and Evelyn's voice rose in song, no longer edged with sorrow, but warm with contentment. They'd found their place at last, these two runners who'd finally stopped running. Not an ending, but a beginning, written in spring flowers and summer promises, in the hard-won peace of souls who'd learned that sometimes the only way to heal is to stand and fight, together, against all the winters yet to come. The winter had been kind to Copper Creek, with steady snow that promised good water for the spring mines, but no killing storms like the year before. As the days grew longer and ice began its slow retreat from the creeks, the town stirred to life with the particular energy of mountain settlements welcoming warmth. Evelyn stood behind the bar of the Gilded Lady, helping Martha prepare for the evening crowd. Her role had evolved over the months, no longer just the singer, but part of the establishment's heart, drawing customers who came as much for her presence as her voice. The wedding ring on her finger caught the lamplight as she polished glasses, a constant reminder of how much had changed. "Full house tonight," Tom Brennan announced, coming in from the back room where he'd been checking inventory. "Word is the Consolidated Mining Company's sending representatives through, looking to buy up claims." Martha frowned. "That'll stir trouble. Half these men would rather die than sell to big operations." "Times are changing," Tom said. But he looked troubled too. Companies have capital the individual miners don't. They can dig deeper, process more ore, and turn free men into wage slaves. Evelyn finished quietly. She'd seen it happen in other towns during her travels, the big operations moving in, buying out or forcing out the independents, changing the whole character of a place. The door opened, bringing a swirl of cold air and Jonah, back from a week guiding Chen's supply wagons through the passes. He looked tired but satisfied, the successful completion of honest work sitting well on his shoulders. His eyes found Evelyn immediately, warming in that way that still made her breath catch. "Mrs. McCready," he greeted formally, though his smile was anything but. "Mr. McCready. Successful trip?" "No troubles, though there's talk on the road about Consolidated sniffing around." He accepted the beer she poured him, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Might change things here." "Change isn't always bad," Martha said, but her tone suggested she didn't believe it. As evening fell and the saloon filled, the tension was palpable. The miners clustered in groups, voices low and urgent. At a corner table sat three men in city clothes, clean-shaven, soft-handed, marking them as clearly as brands, the Consolidated representatives, studying the room with calculating eyes. Evelyn took her place on the small stage, feeling the mood like a physical weight. These nights called for careful song selection, nothing too mournful to darken spirits further, nothing too light to seem mocking. She chose "Hard Times Come Again No More," Stephen Foster's plea for compassion that spoke to every man who'd known want. Her voice rose clear and true, and gradually the angry muttering softened. This was her gift. She'd learned, not just to entertain, but to remind these rough men of gentler things, of homes left behind and dreams not yet surrendered. Even the city men stopped their scheming to listen. But halfway through her second song, the doors burst open. A young miner, Billy Patterson, barely 18 and hot-headed with it, stumbled in, face flushed with drink and anger. "They're buying out old Pete," he announced to the room, "offering him pennies on the dollar for a claim his daddy worked." The room erupted. Miners surged to their feet, hands moving to weapons. The Consolidated men tensed, one reaching inside his coat. Evelyn saw it all happening as if in slow motion, the spark that would ignite into violence. Blood on the sawdust floor. Sheriff Curtis powerless to stop a riot. She didn't think, just acted. Her voice rose over the tumult, not in song but in command. "Enough!" The single word cracked like a whip. Men froze, turning to stare at her. She stood on the stage, no longer the demure entertainer, but something fiercer. "Is this what we are now?" she demanded. "Animals, ready to tear each other apart over money? These men," she gestured to the Consolidated representatives, "came here within their rights. If you don't like their offers, don't sell, but we won't have blood spilled in this place." "Easy for you to say." Billy snarled. "You're not losing your life's work." "Aren't I?" She stepped down from the stage, moving through the crowd with quiet authority. "Every person in this room has lost something. Dreams, hopes, people we loved. That's what brought us here, to this place at the end of the world. We're all refugees from something." She reached Billy, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Your father wouldn't want you to hang for murder over a hole in the ground." The fight went out of the young man like air from a punctured balloon. Around the room, hands moved away from guns. Shoulders relaxed. The consolidated men had the sense to stay quiet, though one nodded respectfully to Evelyn. "Now," she continued, raising her voice again, "Tom's got good whiskey behind that bar, and I've got songs yet to sing. What's it going to be, gentlemen? Music and drink, or a night in Sheriff Curtis's jail?" "Music," someone called, and others took up the cry. The crisis passed, tension dissolving into the ordinary chaos of a saloon night. But Evelyn caught the thoughtful looks thrown her way, the new respect in weathered faces. She'd shown them something beyond her voice, a strength they hadn't expected. Later, as she sang "Beautiful Dreamer," she noticed one of the consolidated men approaching Jonah at the bar. Her husband's face went carefully neutral as they talked, the conversation too low to hear over the music. When the man moved away, leaving a card on the bar, Jonah's expression was troubled. The evening wound down without further incident. The consolidated men left early, perhaps sensing they'd pushed their luck enough for one night. The miners drifted out in groups, still grumbling but no longer murderous. Soon only the regulars remained, the ones who lingered for last drinks and Evelyn's final songs. "That was well done," Sheriff Curtis said, having appeared with his usual timing just after trouble passed. "Could have been ugly without your intervention. Just didn't want blood on Martha's clean floor." Evelyn demurred. Nonetheless, he tipped his hat. "Town's lucky to have you, Mrs. McCready, both of you." After he left, Evelyn found Jonah still at the bar, turning the business card over in his fingers. What did they want? "To offer me a job, head of security for their operation here." His voice was flat. "Good money, steady work. But I'd be protecting them while they squeezed out men like Billy and old Pete." He flicked the card into the spittoon. "Some things aren't worth any price." Tom overheard, nodding approval. "That's the difference between men like you and men like them. You've got principles. Principles don't buy much at Chen's store." Jonah observed. "No, but they let you sleep at night." Martha interjected. "Besides, you're doing fine with the guide work, and Evelyn's teaching brings in steady money." It was true. 3 mornings a week, Evelyn taught letters and numbers to miners' children in the back room of the church. The work fulfilled her in ways performing never had, watching young minds open to possibility. Some of the mothers had started joining, eager to learn reading themselves. "We're building something here," Evelyn said softly. "All of us. That's worth more than consolidated silver." They closed the saloon and walked home through empty streets. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the thin mountain air. Their boots crunched on frozen mud, and their breath made clouds that mingled and dissipated. "You were magnificent tonight," Jonah said. "The way you handled that crowd, I was terrified," she admitted. "But I kept thinking about what you would do. Stand ground, speak truth, don't let fear win. You're giving me too much credit." "Am I?" She stopped walking, turning to face him. "You stood between me and Garrison's guns. You gave up your solitude for a stranger. Don't tell me about credit. Jonah McCready." He pulled her close, there in the middle of the empty street. "We've come a ways, haven't we? From that first night in the storm. Farther than miles can measure." She rested her head on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady. "Do you miss it? The solitude?" "Sometimes," he answered honestly. "But then I wake up next to you, or watch you with those children, or see how this town's adopted us, and I think maybe I was never meant to be alone. Maybe I was just waiting. For what? For you. For this." For the life we're building. They stood there a moment longer, wrapped in each other in the cold night, before continuing home. But as they reached their street, Evelyn noticed a figure huddled on their porch steps, a woman, wrapped in a thin shawl, shivering. Jonah's hand went to his gun, old habits dying hard, but Evelyn recognized something in the woman's posture, the particular desperation of someone with nowhere left to run. "Can we help you?" Evelyn called softly. The woman looked up, revealing a face marked by bruises old and new. Are you Mrs. McCready, the singer?" "I am." In town they said you might understand. My husband." She broke off, shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. Evelyn looked at Jonah, seeing her own memories reflected in his understanding eyes. Without discussion, they moved as one, Evelyn helping the woman to her feet while Jonah opened the door. "Come inside," Evelyn said gently. "You're safe now." They settled her by the fire. Sarah Hennings, wife of a miner from the camp upriver, fled with nothing but the clothes on her back. The story came out in broken pieces. A husband whose temper worsened with drink, escalating violence. The final night when she'd feared for her life. "I didn't know where else to go," Sarah whispered. "But they said in town. They said you'd survived something similar." Evelyn knelt before her, taking cold hands in warm ones. "You did the right thing, the brave thing. He'll come looking." "Let him," Jonah said quietly. And there was something in his tone that made Sarah look up with hope. They made her a bed in the small room they'd added for guests, provided clean clothes from Evelyn's wardrobe, promised safety through the night, after Sarah finally slept. Exhausted by fear and flight, Evelyn and Jonah sat by their own fire, processing this echo of their past. "She can't stay here forever," Evelyn said. "No, but she can stay until she decides what's next." Jonah stared into the flames. "Might be we need to talk to Sheriff Curtis and the other women in town. This won't be the last time someone needs refuge." "A network," Evelyn mused. "Women helping women, safe houses, funds for travel if needed." "You're thinking big. Why not? We changed our lives. Why not help others change theirs?" He smiled at her fierce determination. "And they say I'm the dangerous one." The next morning brought exactly what they'd expected. Jack Hennings, drunk and belligerent, demanding his wife's return. But he found more than he'd bargained for. Not just Jonah, steady and armed in the doorway, but half the women of Copper Creek, alerted by some mysterious network that operated faster than telegraph. Martha Brennan, Chen's wife Lynn, the pastor's wife Margaret. Others, all standing witness, all ready to intervene. "She's not your property, Hennings," Martha stated flatly. "She's a person, and she's chosen to leave." "You've got no right. We've got every right," Lynn interrupted, her usually soft voice steel hard. "The right of human decency." Sheriff Curtis arrived, carefully neutral but positioned significantly closer to the women than to Hennings. "Seems to me, Jack, you'd best head back to camp. Cool off some. She's my wife, and if she chooses to return, that's her decision." Curtis said, "But not today. Not like this." Faced with unified opposition, Hennings retreated, spewing threats that no one took seriously. The women dispersed slowly, but not before plans were made. A fund for women in need, safe houses identified, a system for warning and support. "You've started something," Jonah told Evelyn that evening as they watched Sarah help with dinner, color returning to her cheeks. "We've started something," she corrected. "This town. These people, they were ready. They just needed someone to say it out loud." Over the following weeks, their home became a way station of sorts. Sarah stayed until she'd saved enough for passage to California, where her sister lived. 2 more women came through, guided by the network that grew stronger each day. The cabin on Eagle's Nest, once a hermit's refuge, had become a beacon. Not everyone approved. There were mutters about propriety, about women forgetting their place. The Consolidated men, still in town negotiating, made snide comments about frontier justice, but the heart of Copper Creek held firm, protective of its own expanded definition of family. One evening, as spring rain washed the last snow from the lower slopes, Evelyn sat on the porch watching the sunset. The rocking chair Jonah had made creaked gently as she moved, a sound that had become synonymous with home. From inside came voices. Jonah teaching young Billy Patterson to read, the boy had asked, shyly, wanting to understand contracts before signing anything. Sarah helping with dinner one last time before her departure tomorrow. A year ago, she'd been running, terrified, alone. Now she was surrounded by chosen family, by purpose, by a love that had grown deeper with each challenge faced together. Another winter alone, she murmured to herself, then smiled. Never again. Jonah emerged, settling beside her with his own chair. Talking to yourself, counting blessings. She reached for his hand. Remember when you offered me shelter that night? Did you imagine it would lead to all this? Honestly, I thought we'd be lucky to survive the week. He brought her hand to his lips. But you have a way of changing things. Evelyn McCready, of making them bigger, better than anyone expects. We have a way, she corrected. Your strength, my voice, this town's heart, it all works together. They sat in comfortable silence, watching night settle over their valley. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Consolidated's pressure, Sarah's departure, the ongoing work of building community in a hard land. But tonight, there was peace. No regrets, she asked, their old ritual. Only one, he said, and her heart skipped until she saw his smile. I should have built a bigger cabin, the way you collect strays. We'll need more room soon. She laughed, the sound carrying across the valley like music. Then we'll build them, room by room, life by life, until everyone who needs shelter finds it. Ambitious woman, man who loves ambitious women. True enough. He stood, pulling her up with him. Come inside, Mrs. McCready. Let's see what our assembled strays have made for dinner. They went in together, leaving the door open to the spring evening, ready for whoever might need to find them. The lamp in the window burned steady, a signal to the lost that here, at least, was safe harbor. Here was home. Spring came full and warm to Copper Creek, painting the mountainsides with wildflowers and filling the air with promise. The snow retreated to the highest peaks, leaving the valleys green and alive. It was on such a morning that Jonah found Evelyn at the edge of the forest, kneeling beside a cluster of columbines. Perfect spot, she said without looking up, her hands gentle on the delicate blooms. He knew what she meant. They'd been discussing it for weeks. The right place to ask her properly, to replace the desperate wedding born of gunfire with something deliberate and celebrated. The clearing where she knelt was sheltered by aspens, with a view of the valley below and the peaks above, nature's cathedral. The whole town wants to come, he warned. Martha's been planning the feast for a month. Let them come. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. We've hidden long enough. It's time to celebrate what we've found instead of mourning what we'd lost. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday that dawned clear as crystal, Copper Creek gathered in that mountain meadow. Miners had traded picks for their best clothes, their wives wore dresses saved for special occasions, and children ran between the trees trailing ribbons. Even the Consolidated men had departed, their offers rejected by a community that chose cooperation over corporate control. Pastor William stood ready with his Bible, but this ceremony would blend traditions. Lin Chen had woven flowers into Evelyn's hair, a Chinese custom for luck. Murphy had contributed Irish whiskey for toasting. The Mexican miners brought guitars, ready to play once vows were exchanged. Evelyn wore a simple dress of sky blue, Martha's gift, sewn with the help of half the town's women. Jonah waited in his one good suit, looking uncomfortable but determined. When their eyes met across the meadow, everything else faded. Dearly beloved, Pastor Williams began, but Jonah raised a hand. Before we start, there's something I need to say. He looked out at the assembled crowd, people who'd become family, who'd stood with them through fire and storm. A year ago, I came to these mountains looking for solitude. I built walls out of hurt and called it safety. Then this woman arrived, carrying her own pain but refusing to let it define her. He turned to Evelyn, taking her hands. You didn't just change my life. You showed me I'd never been living at all, just existing, one empty day after another. So before these witnesses, I want to thank you for saving me from a different kind of death, the slow freezing of a heart that had forgotten how to hope. Evelyn's eyes shimmered with tears, but she smiled. My turn? At his nod, she addressed the crowd. They say the West is where people go to disappear, and I did come here to vanish, to become nobody, to hide from shadows that seem bigger than mountains. But you can't disappear when people see you, really see you, past the fear to who you might become. She squeezed Jonah's hands. You saw me. This whole beautiful, stubborn town saw me, and in being seen, I found myself again. So thank you, all of you, for giving us a place to build something new from the ashes of what we were. Now may I continue? Pastor Williams asked with a gentle humor. The crowd laughed, tension breaking into joy. The ceremony was simple, traditional vows mixed with personal promises. Jonah pledged to stand between her and any storm. Evelyn promised to fill his silences with song. They exchanged rings again, these bought with honest money rather than desperate hope. When Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next valley. The celebration moved to the Gilded Lady, transformed for the occasion. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Everyone had contributed something. Chen's wife had made dumplings. The German miners brought sausages. Martha had baked 3 cakes. Musicians took turns, creating an impromptu concert that lasted into evening. Dance with me, Jonah requested as fiddle music filled the air. You don't dance, Evelyn protested. I didn't do a lot of things before you. Come on. They moved together, clumsy but laughing, surrounded by other couples who'd taken the floor. Billy Patterson danced with Chen's daughter. Sheriff Curtis waltzed with his wife. Even Murphy had found a partner. The whole town moved to the music, differences forgotten in celebration. As night fell, toasts were raised. Tom Brennan praised Jonah's courage. Martha celebrated Evelyn's voice. Sheriff Curtis told embarrassing stories about them both. But it was young Billy who brought tears, standing awkwardly with his glass. Mr. and Mrs. McCready taught me something, he said. That being strong isn't about fighting. It's about standing up for what's right, even when you're scared. It's about building instead of tearing down. So here's to them, and to the Copper Creek they've helped us become. The party continued, but Evelyn and Jonah slipped away, walking hand in hand through streets they now knew by heart. The cabin waited, lit by the moon, looking nothing like the fortress it had once been. Garden plots showed green shoots, courtesy of Evelyn's spring planting. A new room had been added, ready for the next woman seeking shelter. The rocking chairs sat side by side, promising quiet evenings ahead. No regrets? Jonah asked as they stood on their porch. Stop asking that, Evelyn laughed. My only regret is that we can't fit the whole town in our living room. Did you see Marcus dancing? I didn't know Germans could move like that. They went inside, still hearing distant music from the saloon. Their home welcomed them, books on shelves, curtains at windows, evidence of lives being lived rather than merely survived. What now? Evelyn asked, untangling flowers from her hair. Now? Jonah helped her with a stubborn bloom. Now we live, day by day, season by season. We help who we can, love who we choose, build what we dream. Simple as that? Simple as that. He kissed her, soft and sure. We've had enough complications for one lifetime. Outside, an owl called across the valley. Inside, 2 people who'd run out of places to run finally stood still, holding each other in a home built from hope and stubbornness. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. It always did in the mountains. But tonight, there was music in the distance and love in the darkness, and that was enough. Welcome home, Mrs. McCready, Jonah whispered. "Welcome home, Mr. McCready," she replied. And in the cabin at the end of the world, two hearts that had forgotten how to trust learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you get to stop running. Sometimes, you get to stay. The lamp in the window burned steady through the night, a beacon for any soul still searching for shelter. But for now, all was quiet. All was peace. The McCreadys were home. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier stories that capture the spirit of the American West. What did you think of Jonah and Evelyn's journey? Share your thoughts. I'd love to hear what touched your heart in their story.